If we could all take our seats, thank you all for being here this morning. Really appreciate your participation. Welcome to New America. I'm Jackie Williams. I'm director of the College Savings Initiative here. The College Savings Initiative, which all of you should have information about in your packet, is a joint project between New America and the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis. So we appreciate very much your being here. We have some tremendous speakers that you'll be hearing from in a few minutes, and we will have the opportunity at the end of their prepared remarks for the audience to get involved in the discussion here. Purpose for our meeting today is really to talk about college savings. In a recent Sallie Mae study, which you'll be hearing a lot about, and receiving copies in the room, I want to remind everybody that the full copy of the Sallie Mae study is available in the back of the room, so make sure that you pick up one of those today. But Scott Buchanan will be talking about that study. But by a rate of 92%, parents overwhelmingly said that they expect their children to attend college, and nearly half plan to pay for at least most of the cost of sending them to college. And I think that this statistic really underscores the aspirations that all parents have for their children. And this finding was consistent across income, ethnicity, race, whatever criteria you looked at, that statistic was consistent. With that said, though, other studies have shown that parents really have grave concerns about their ability to afford the rising cost of higher education. In the late 80s, concerned with the rising cost of college at that time, the state of Michigan created the nation's first prepaid college savings plan. And thereafter, several other states joined and entered and started their own plans in order to help families make early financial preparation for college. And in 1996, Section 529 was added to the Internal Revenue Code, which clarified the federal treatment of these plans, and hence the name 529 plans. The goals of these plans were really very simple, and that was to create accessible savings products that would help families plan and save in advance for a child's college education. States provided tax benefits, consumer protections, and in some cases, matching funds in order to be able to grow the supply of college-educated citizens in their states. And hopefully those graduates would stay and thereby help to support the economies of those individual states. Yet more than 20 years later, the cost of college has grown 10 times as fast as the median income for families with children. And meanwhile, issues of access and affordability have contributed to America losing its global lead in education. The states work collectively to make incremental improvements to these plans and to attempt to make them more accessible and usable for American families. And as public awareness has grown, the number of families saving using 529 plans has grown significantly. Every state either runs their own plan or at least sponsors a plan. And according to CSPN, the College Savings Plans Network, there are over 11 million beneficiary accounts with assets now exceeding $100 million. CSPN also shows that about 1.6 million students are in the process of or have already used their funds to attend college. And anecdotal information shows that for students for whom these accounts exist, that there is an over 90% college attendance rate. And in fact, the state of Michigan, which is the oldest plan in the country, shows that 95% of all the people who have had accounts and have matriculated have actually used their funds to go to college. So there's at least anecdotal information that the existence of these accounts really matters in terms of that student attending college. Despite the increased awareness of these plans, however, there remains much to do to fulfill the potential of these plans. Moderate income families in particular can benefit by building assets for college, and savings can really change other behaviors and expectations of low income families as well. And I think what we're all interested in hearing today is how can policymakers support the aspirations of these families? Part of the answer seems to be in creating simple, intuitive and accessible information and processes, and eliminating disincentives to save and providing effective incentives for families to enroll in and save in 529 plans. States have really been the incubators for a lot of the innovative strategies that have been used to encourage families to save. So how do we learn from effective interventions and really encourage broader participation, particularly by low to moderate income families who are generally more likely to have difficulty raising money for college? Treasury Secretary Geithner, Vice President Biden, and others have talked about the enormous potential these plans have to help more families attend and complete college, and how savings can really help foster economic growth and prosperity in our country. So that is really kind of the framework with which we discuss these issues in a broader context this morning. Over the next 45 minutes or so, you'll have an opportunity to hear from some very important voices on these matters. And after their prepared remarks, we will have an opportunity to ask questions and have you join in our conversation. Let me just provide some introductory comments to our speakers. They will come up individually, and then after they've prepared made their comments, we'll join them in a panel discussion. Our first speaker will be Scott Buchanan. He's the Director of Government Relations for Sallie Mae, and he works with members of Congress and other policymakers to inform discussion on higher education, financing, financial services, tax law, and regulation. He has worked for Sallie Mae for the past decade in consumer marketing and public awareness. And in addition to other political campaign experience that he has in addition to his Sallie Mae experience, he previously worked for Wachovia Corporation in Atlanta. He holds a BA in political science from Davidson College and a master's in public policy from George Mason. Our next speaker is Ileana Kuzmenko. She's an assistant professor of economics and public affairs at Princeton University. She's currently on a leave of absence from Princeton and working as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Microeconomic Analysis for the Department of Treasury. As a labor economist, she's particularly interested in issues of social, gender, and educational inequality. She earned her PhD from Harvard University, and she's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economic Research. Our third speaker is Dan Ebersol. He is the State Treasurer of Georgia. His office is responsible for the receipt, investment, accounting, and disbursement of state general, trust, and custodial funds. His office also administers the Path to College 529 plan, which is the 529 college savings plan for Georgia. They also administer the Tennessee 529 plan, which combined has over $700 million in assets. Mr. Ebersol is also the current chair of the executive board of the College Savings Plans Network. Dan is the past president of the National Association of State Treasurers, the past president of the National Association of State Auditors, Controllers, and Treasurers, and he has won a number of awards during his career in public service and is a graduate of Georgia State University. And finally, our last speaker this morning is Margaret Clancy. She is the policy director at the Center for Social Development in Washington University in St. Louis. We work collectively on this project of the College Savings Initiative. She's also responsible for the design and leadership of large-scale policy demonstrations, including the Seed for Oklahoma Kids Research Experiment, which is a multi-year national children and youth savings policy research initiative. And since 2001, she's researched 529 college savings plans. She also led the account monitoring research project for SEED and the American Dream demonstration, which is the first national study of IDAs. Prior to joining CSD, Ms. Clancy administered corporate 401k and defined benefit pension plans and worked as a trust company vice president. She has a BS degree in business administration from Southern Illinois University, and a Master of Social Work from Washington University in St. Louis. She's also a certified employee benefits specialist. So that is our panel this morning, and I'd ask Scott Buchanan to come up and get us started.
First of all, thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you to the New America Foundation for hosting this opportunity, hopefully for a meaningful dialogue about some of not only the key findings we found, but thinking broadly about college savings and how we can inform future debate about what we can do to better strengthen and understand the strong links that savings have to college access, affordability, and completion. By way of background, Sallie Mae is not only an education credit and loan service provider, but among other things, we manage college savings plans all across America. We currently manage through our You Promise brands about $19 billion in college savings. So we're very familiar with families and the way they save and the things that are working for them and things that are not working for them. And as college costs continue to rise, providing all the financing tools for colleges made us increasingly aware, I think, that families need to find a balance between using all the tools that exist to fund their college choices. For most American families, scholarships and grants won't begin to cover costs. Borrowing of any kind can't be the only answer, and savings won't do it alone either. Getting the right mix is critical, especially since savings are essential to really creating fundamental changes in attitudes that will make college more accessible for low and middle income families. Ensuring that all families have the ability to choose the right school at the right price and manage those costs. Sort of the reason I'm really here, I think, is to talk a little bit about a study that we had conducted. 2 years ago, we asked Gallup to conduct a study on how America actually pays for college, so we could really start getting beyond some of the anecdotes that are driving a lot of the debate and really figure out in a longitudinal way what the changes were about the way families address the college cost issue. And how America saves for college was sort of the next logical step for us, and as we're trying to figure out how we can improve college access long before that bill comes due. So this morning I'm going to cover some of the key findings that we found in that study. Before if I can figure out where to point at. I'm going to talk briefly. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there's certainly methodology that Gallup had conducted on this, and this is a phone survey that we worked on to create a representative sample of families across America to get a sense of how they were actually saving for college. There's certainly more disclosure in the full report about the methodology if you'd care to read that. But I think one of the fundamental questions about why do savings matter, and pulling from some of the data we found, if you look at perceived likelihood to attend by planned contributions, there's no question that as families are more likely to attend, they're making choices to plan better. So there's no question there's a direct connection here, a correlation between these attitudes. But more fundamentally, I think, when you look at why savings matter, when you looked at those who've saved and those who have not saved, there's a shocking difference between the amount of those families that have borrowed in order to go to college. In fact, if you look at the numbers, if you save at least $10,000, which for an average family, if you're talking about raising beginning saving at birth, going all the way to 18, you're talking, I think, roughly around $40 a month, which is less than most people's cell phone bill. If you at least can get to that 10,000 mark, you are less than half as likely to borrow anything to go to college, which is a pretty shocking statistic, and I think a pretty important one to inform why does it matter that we get people to save even anything. Looking at who saves, I think this is a question that also needs to be part of the debate about trying to make sure that we're getting savings in the right place. When you look, there's no question that families of all kinds are saving, but there's a fundamental missing component here, which is that 32% of the lowest income families are saving. And this is it all. And it's pretty much, that is the soft spot here that we need to probably focus our attention on in terms of a policy discussion. Those are the people that we need to be thinking about as we're improving. How do we reach those folks? But I think what's also interesting to know is that when you look at those in that income group, in those lower income groups that are saving, that you find that they are making pretty significant investments in savings. When they begin to save, And this slide shows that this is mean annual savings. So the amount that a family in these income groups saves each year is pretty significantly more than middle to upper middle income families. And that's a pretty interesting finding, I think. So when you couple that with the fact that as a percentage of their income, we find that lower income families are saving nearly 7.5% of their annual income towards college. I think there's no question that shows there is a desire on the part of lower income families to make an investment in saving for college. There's a will to do it, and the question is we need to focus on how do we make it better for them to be able to do that. It's pretty interesting, I think, when you compare that lower income families are actually making more of a personal commitment out of their even scarcer resources that they have to put more and more aside to paying for college. So that's who saves. I think the next thing that's important to look at is saying, how do families actually save? One thing that we looked at in this study was asking the question about how is it that you are saving. As we all know, there are many ways to save. You can actually be in a process of doing it regularly on a monthly basis, or as perhaps you have some extra income that comes your way, or friends and family are able to make contributions. When we asked families, we found that around half of them were engaged in some sort of habitual saving practice. Either they had a deposit into a savings account of some kind, whether it's checking, a dedicated savings account, money market, or a 529 plan, something along those lines. Or were doing it on a regular basis, even if they didn't have sort of an auto debit or something like that was dumping money regularly in. And when we take that finding and couple it with what we found in terms of the plans that we manage, and where we know there's no question that those who are in a habitual savings plan are more likely to increase the value of their college savings, this points to us, I think, a real direction forward in the sense that we need to drive that number north. When we know that habitual savers will far outpace those who do it in an ad hoc fashion, and we find that only 50% of people who are saving habitually, then that means that we need to focus some energies on that front. Turning to another, I think, interesting finding is that when we look at the question of time and how much time you spend on saving when you begin saving, do you start when your kid gets into high school? Do you start when they're born? These sorts of questions. When we compared and looked at people among income distributions and said, okay, who's been saving for less than 7 years and who's been saving for more than 7 years, and 7 years seemed to be an interesting break actually in the data. When you look at, there's no question that those who are saving for longer save more. That's not a surprise. It's not earth-shattering news. But I think what is interesting is when you look at the income breakdowns by the growth in the amount that they can increase their savings, that you look at lower and middle income families far outpace higher income families in terms of the accretive value that long-term savings can have to them. Certainly there's no question higher income families are able to save more money on a dollar basis, but in terms of the actual growth that lower and middle income families can achieve, it's pretty significant. When you look at a growth rate of 150% versus 294 versus just 100% growth in the highest income families. So that I think that points that for low and middle income families that there's an incredible value to them to get in not only habitual savings, but to do it long term. Turning to another sort of question about what are the tools that our families are using, and I think there's a lot of discussion about 529 savings plans, and I think that we wanted to highlight a couple of things about that. That around 33% of college savers are using 529 plans, and certainly there's no question that 529 plans are gaining popularity. When you look at the numbers about what age the children are in families who are using 529 plans, we see that there's no question that there's a wave coming up the pipe here of families that are using 529s as a very important vehicle for saving for them. And we didn't see the same sort of trend in a lot of the other savings vehicles. They were more static and more flat. That you really see that there's this large bubble of families who are just starting out, who have just begun to save for college, who are using 529 plans. And I think that's also very much tied into the fact that 529s are very young vehicles for saving. And in that respect, it's not necessarily a surprise either, but I think it points to the fact that as we think about ways to improve college savings, that this is where a great majority of families are going to be turning to over the next decades because of the dedicated nature of the 529 plan. I think one of the things I also wanted to talk about that emerged from the analysis we did is finding that 529 plans seem to be, of all those things that I listed previously, seem to be something that there is consistent use of across all income groups. And no matter how you divide it out by income group, by race or ethnicity, by region of the country, that there is consistent use of 529 plans. Whereas I think it's not surprising that if you look at those who are low savers and versus high savers, that there's an increasing use of those who save more and more turn more to things like mutual funds and stocks and bonds. It shouldn't come as much of as a shock in the sense that those who are high dollar savers are more likely to be those who are sort of financially savvy and are using those kinds of tools. But I think it shows that those who are even beginner savers use 529 plans and understand those plans far better than they do the other tools that many families use, considering that mutual funds and stocks and bonds are one of the most popular ways to save across the board. But when you couple that with the fact that we asked families, how aware are you of these dedicated savings vehicles for college? Some I think, disturbing and once again probably not shocking findings emerged. When you look at awareness by income distribution, you find that there's a significant amount of low-income families that are completely unaware of the availability of a dedicated college savings plan. Certainly, many of them are saving in other ways, including using regular checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, bonds, those sorts of things, or just socking money away under the mattress. But this is pretty shocking in the sense that low-income families had statistically a very divergent level of unawareness of 529 plans. When you look at the highest income families, had a once again unsurprisingly large awareness about these vehicles. And I think that points to another thing that we need to walk away from this from, which is that it seems to be that awareness is going to be key, that we have to find ways to make those lower income families aware of the opportunities that exist today so that they can use them more robustly. We turn to savings motivators. So we've answered, I think, a little bit of the questions, just the beginning of the questions that folks would have about who's saving and how they're saving. But the fundamental question that we all want to walk away from this, I think, is, okay, that's where we are today. And the question is, how do we improve that scenario? How do we make it better? How do we encourage families to do more? And when we ask families and we presented to them some options about things that might increase their likelihood to save, and we found pretty significantly that matching contributions from employers into a college savings plan was across all incomes, and in fact most strongly, in the full report you can read this, but most strongly for lower to middle income families, that matching contribution would be something that would be very powerfully motivating to them. Tax benefits, once again not surprisingly for lower income families, were not strongly correlated to their desire to save. But for middle-income families in that $35,000 to $100,000 range, tax benefits for them were a very strong motivator. So those two things, I think, when you look at, if we want to target low and middle-income families, those are the two ways that we found of the questions that we asked, and certainly there are other policy options out there, but those seem to have a real strong power for those particular families, the low and middle-income families. So turning briefly, I think, to some of the policy implications that we see coming out of this study, and I think there's a lot more that does emerge in it, but savings are pretty significantly correlated to reduced borrowing and a belief in college accessibility. The more you save, the more you believe you're going to go to college, the less you will borrow, and all those things together make for a better college choice and a better college decision process for especially low and middle income families. Education choices are more sensitive to economic downturns. We found that if you compare whether you're saving for retirement, saving for college, or doing general savings, we found that there was most sensitivity in the past year, year and a half, when the economic crisis has taken hold. There's more sensitivity on savings. Families are less likely to save for college because of the economic situation than they are to save for retirement. So the decline in retirement savings is actually less than the decline in college savings. So that's very concerning when you think about families or more, and I guess this is a question of prioritization in a family, but when you're more concerned about saving your retirement than you are saving for your child's education. We need to be aware of that, the sensitivity that families have to that. Matching contributions are powerful motivators, especially for low income. Tax benefits are strong incentives for the middle income families. And I think 529 is clear, has a solid base architecture to adapt these kind of incentives. But most fundamentally, awareness efforts, which is critical if you look at low-income families, need to be centered on habitual savings, matching contribution solutions, and getting families younger. When you couple all those things about you need to save before you get to that 7-year break period, matching contributions are a key motivator, habitual savers, far outpace non-habitual savers in investment, those are things that we need to be focused on in awareness. Certainly the full study is available at salliemae.com, How America Saves, but I just wanted to highlight some of those key findings as we begin the discussion today about things we can do to increase college savings that will affect college access, awareness, and completion. Thanks, Jack.
So thank you so much for having me. Very good study and very interesting, and in fact something that we had read in preparing our study as well. So okay, so the way we got involved, the Treasury Department got involved with 529s, is Vice President Biden tasked Secretary Geithner and the Department of Education as part of the Middle Class Task Force to look into 529 plans as how well they were performing, how well they were helping middle and working class families save for education. And this is part of, we were very happy to take on this task, and I think just goes to show the commitment to post-secondary education by the administration. And certainly it's something that the Secretary is quite interested in. Given today's economy, this is an absolute must, having some post-secondary education. So our report, which maybe some of you have read, it's also available online. It looks at the extent to which 529 plans serve various income groups, and we have some data analysis that I'll show you on that topic today. Plan cost and investment choices, and that analysis sort of informs the recommendations that we make on 529 plans. Sort of as we were tasked by Vice President Biden to think about ways to make them more effective, reliable, and attractive to middle and working class families. So just to quickly go over the recommendations, then we'll return to them later in the talk. We would encourage states to think about these 5 ideas, to give all 529 participants a choice of investing in low-cost age-based index funds. We'll talk a bit about why we think those are especially attractive for some investors. Eliminate something that we call home state bias to foster more competition between plans. And by this we mean the tendency of most plans to only offer preferential treatment with respect to state income taxes for investments in your own in-state plan. To make contribution limits per beneficiary rather than per beneficiary per state. We'll talk a bit about why we think that's a good idea. To further improve participant access to information, allow them to comparison shop across plans in a way that's maybe a little bit easier than it is now, and improve monitoring compliance, which we'll talk briefly about at the end of the talk. So today's presentation, we're going to give a bit of background, although certainly we don't need a lot of background for this group. You guys are quite the experts. So we're just going to highlight a couple of the findings that are in the report. So 529 account benefits and ownership by income group, which I think will complement a lot of the things that Scott presented. And then talk a bit about investment options and account fees. And then this analysis will sort of inform our sort of more detailed discussion about the Treasury recommendations. And I should say that these recommendations are really just the beginning of a discussion, and we certainly want input from people throughout this community on how best to move forward from this report. And I should also say that the report really benefited from a lot of conversations with people in this very room, so we're very thankful for that. Okay, so as Scott sort of alluded to, 529 benefits and use tend to increase with family income, and there's just a couple of reasons for that that we'll go over. The first is that essentially, the 529 plans are tax-preferred savings vehicles, and so therefore the benefit of these plans are going to relate very closely to the actual taxes that you don't pay. There might be other benefits as well, like just having a plan might make your child think more about college, but in terms of the financial benefit, it's basically equal to the taxes that you would otherwise pay if you were saving in a non-tax-preferred vehicle. So therefore the tax benefit is going to be a positive function of your tax rate, which is a positive function of your household income. So, if you're a family that actually has no tax liability, there's going to be limited benefit in this sense of a 529 investment for you. There's another risk, sort of a hidden tax, that applies to lower income families who would be investing in 529 plans. And as you know, if you take out money for a non-qualified withdrawal, which would be the case, for instance, if your child drops out of high school and is unable to go to college, you have all this money now where when you withdraw it, have to pay taxes on it and a 10% penalty. So given that, unfortunately, it's the case that the chance of that happening is higher in lower income families, that's sort of a hidden tax that it makes this investment slightly riskier for people in low income families. So one last thing, and it's something that the Obama administration is trying to do something about, and I don't have this noted on the slide, but another hidden tax can be, it is the case that if you are eligible for financial aid, in some states, and this used to be the case in the federal government as well, 529 plans, savings of all kinds, decreases the amount of financial aid you're going to get. And it's, we're moving away from that, trying to not discourage saving by families, and if you sort of changing the way that we are looking at assets when calculating federal financial aid, some states still do this. And given that low-income families, again, are more likely to be receiving financial aid, this is a third sort of hidden tax on them. So it is maybe not surprising, as you said, as Scott said, that some of these advantages are a little bit more amplified for higher income families. So we're going to go a bit to some data that we find, again, that's complementing a lot of the things that Scott found. So here is just sort of an illustration of how these sort of tax benefits all add up. And we're not taking into account any of the financial aid stuff here. We're basically just looking at the tax benefit in terms of your marginal income tax rate. And then we're going to look a bit at what happens if you have a penalized withdrawal. So the way of thinking about this table, we're looking at a low-income, middle-income, and high-income saver. The low-income saver we define as having a 15% federal income tax, being in that bracket. The middle-income saver is 28, but the next bracket's just 25, so it's very similar for them. And this you should think about above about 70,000 household income. And the high-income saver, this is 35, but the next over is about 33, so this would be above 250 or so. So just to give you some sense. And as you can see, even for the person in the lowest tax bracket, there is a real advantage. The zero line is basically, you should think of that as what you're getting if you're just saving in a non-tax preferred vehicle. You're just putting money into a regular bank account. And the 15% is saying that, just based on the federal tax advantage, you're doing 15% better than if you had just been saving in your savings account. And as some states, most states also offer a state tax break. It's a little bit higher if you live in a state that allows you a state deduction. But relative to these benefits, the penalty is not trivial. And if you think about, if you're a family that has a 50-50 chance of having your child go to college, that investment doesn't look quite so attractive. But for the middle and the high income savers, they really are a good deal, especially if you consider the fact that the chance of being in this situation is a lot lower. So I think that's just sort of an interesting illustration of how all these benefits sort of work together. So this is complementing some of the Gallup results as well. Perhaps not surprising, we do see that participation in these plans really does increase with income. So here we're looking at the Survey of Consumer Finances, which I think is nice that we have two different data sets that are sort of telling us a lot of the same things. We're looking at just parents, just households with children, so sort of the proper universe, and looking at of that group by income percentile, how many people are saving in a 529 or a Coverdell. Unfortunately, they sort of group the two together in this data set. And perhaps not surprising, you really see a lot of what we saw with the Gallup data. The interesting thing that we sort of thought is that if you think about the group before this, who are really getting some real benefits, they would correspond to about here. And they're not taking advantage of 529 plans in the way that you might think. And so I think this really does go to awareness, that even among middle-income families, we don't have the awareness of 529 plans, even though, especially if you're having a kid that's probably going to go to college, it's a pretty good deal. So I think, in terms of, who's sort of leaving money on the table and who should we really be reaching out to, it's this group right here. Just so sort of moving on from sort of our findings on income distribution, just a bit about investment options. And again, I think a lot of people in this room would know more than I do about this aspect of 529 plans. We were quite impressed in our research, just the wide variety of options that most people have that really would accommodate different tastes for risk and return. The age-based funds seem to be the most popular based on what we have found. It's kind of, again, I'm sure you know much about this. It sort of mimics like a targeted retirement account. It's a little bit more aggressive in your early years, and then as you reach the years when your child is about to go and you start taking withdrawals, it moves away from equities. The other sort of distinction that we noted was index funds versus more managed funds. And a lot of states offer index funds, but they're not universally available across states. And for example, one of the things we really, that kind of struck us was that only 23 of the 48 states with direct sold plans offer age-based index funds. So if you think about sort of the direct sold plans, the index, the age-based being maybe like your plain vanilla, you can buy it online, it's passively managed, it might just be some, kind of a good deal for somebody who doesn't want to be thinking constantly about all their investment strategies. Only 23 of 48 states really give this option. So we noted that. And again, because they have low fees, they tend to historically perform pretty well and are probably quite attractive to a family that doesn't want to necessarily have to become a financial expert. So one last bit of analysis before we get on to the recommendations. We looked a bit at account fees. So here now we're looking at direct sold, moderate risk age-based funds. And we break them down into the index funds versus the more actively managed funds. And there's a couple of things I think to note from this table. These are expense ratios. There is, even when you look within very similar products, a lot of variation in the expense ratio, especially for the index funds. I mean, nothing's ever an apples-to-apples comparison, but these are all pretty similar products. And yet, just across different states, you have substantial variation in how much you're paying in terms of expenses. The other thing I think that's worth noting is just that, as you might expect, these are a lot cheaper with respect to fees. So what does that mean? It's hard to think about expense ratios in terms of real-world dollars. Whoops. So here we just try to simulate. We take somebody who's 5 years old. They're going to be saving they're going to be sort of involved with 529s for the next 17 years. They're saving. They start to withdraw money at 18, 19, 20 on. What do those expense accounts actually mean? And what kind of the variation of the expense ratios, what does it mean in terms of the variation in how it affects the consumer? So we simulated the front load fee that corresponds to the expense ratio. This basically means every time you put in money into your 529, what's getting taken off the top? And that's quite those expense ratios, which are kind of difficult to imagine. there's quite a lot of variation in how these plans sort of treat the consumer. And this is another metric, just looking at the percent of your real returns that are absorbed by fees. You're in a good state, or you're in a low expense fund. It's not so bad, but this is getting pretty onerous. So I think we thought it was really important to note just how much variation there is, even again with something that's a pretty similar product. Okay, so returning now to the recommendations, and hopefully some of the stuff that we just discussed will sort of inform why we thought these were important things for states to consider. The first was just to give all 529 participants the choice of investing in something that's sort of simple and straightforward. So as we mentioned, index funds have several sort of major advantages. They have lower fees, and they perform well on average, and they're just sort of easy to understand. However, we noticed, as I mentioned before, that not all states have the sort of plain vanilla option. And we certainly don't think that this should be the only option. This is just sort of be one thing that consumers have the right to choose, and if they want to do something more involved, they certainly have the right to. But we just think this is a way of promoting consumer choice. So the second recommendation is addressing what we term home state bias, which is the sort of favored tax treatment that you get if you invest in your in-state plan, and not having that favored tax treatment with respect to state income tax if you invest in a plan that's not in your state. So as economists, we sort of look at all the variation in fees across similar products and think it's at least consistent with there not being sort of competition to sort of drive the fees down to sort of their sort of minimum limit, which we tend as economists to believe. I realize that not everybody shares that view of the world. Tend to think that competition does a good job in driving down fees. So we read that as at least consistent with perhaps the limitation of competition by the fact that you're really encouraged to be just in your home state and not look at other states. That might be part of the story. So as there's sort of some facts about home state bias. Of the 34 states offer some kind of preferential tax treatment, but only 5 of them, with respect to 529s and state income tax, but only 5 of them offer that same treatment if you are in a different state. And so we applaud those states and sort of hope that other states might look at sort of following suit. And actually, no states treat in and out-of-state 529 accounts equally when it comes to state financial aid. So 13 states exclude your own in-state financial aid when you're calculating state financial aid, but none of those 13 states offer that sort of treatment to investments in out-of-state plans. So and again, we just really believe that this sort of like the sort of plain vanilla recommendation just enhances consumer choice. That now you're not really discouraged because of the favorable state tax treatment of looking at other states. This is just giving consumers a wider menu of choices. So the third recommendation has to do with limiting how much you could put in a 529, given that there's only so much you really do need for even the fanciest education possible. And currently, just the way that the laws are written in kind of this quirky way, you could be saving millions of dollars in a tax-preferred account that really could not possibly be going just to education. So right now we have every state, sort of sensibly, has a per-beneficiary limit, basically saying, you don't need more than about $350,000 even to go to a really fancy education. Unfortunately, not necessarily unfortunately, just the way that things were written, you do have the right to invest in other states, and we think that's great. On the other hand, the beneficiary, the cap applies per beneficiary per state. So you could have this $350,000 plan in 43 states, and it seems just sort of sensible to make this not per beneficiary per state, but per beneficiary. And the reason for that, I think that's just sort of an equity issue, but this does cost the government money in terms of foregone income tax revenue, and it does seem as though giving that kind of tax break to people who have $350,000 plans throughout lots of states is not the best way of using government revenue, and we would rather have that to be plowed back into financial aid and loans and things like that. So the fourth recommendation is sort of helping consumers comparison shop. So, it is sort of a complicated decision to decide which plan to invest in and which fund to invest in. There is a lot of variation in fees, as we showed, and especially in some types of funds. I mean, the variation in fees might be reflecting how actively the account is managed, and it's a complicated decision. So CSPN has done a great job collecting information on 529 plans. SavingForCollege.com has also been, a really useful resource, I think, resource for consumers. But there's no real established format for reporting historical performance. And I think that if we could sort of all figure out a way that would make it really easy for consumers to sort of say, okay, well, here's the fee, here's the performance. I find that still to be a complicated decision, but I think it would be a little bit easier for people. So yeah, we would really love sort of everybody involved with 529s to think about what would be a standard reporting format so that we could sort of help consumers comparison shop. And the last recommendation is really a recommendation for us, and this is to improve monitoring compliance of 529 plans. There are ways in which, again, I think the vast majority of people use 529 plans because they want to save for college. There are ways in which you could imagine people playing games and trying to avoid gift taxes on intergenerational transfers. And we don't know if that happens at all because we really haven't collected data. So this is something the ball is definitely in our court. And again, we're not just trying to be mean. It's just the sense of, tax breaks. These tax breaks are meant to help people invest in their post-secondary education, and to the extent that we can better target dollars for that use and cut down on any kind of other use for these plans that people might have discovered, I think would be a good thing. So if you guys have suggestions on how you might think sort of things that we should be looking for, we'd be very happy to hear that. But this is more something that we need to work on. So I think that's it for me, and I look forward to questions and comments.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Jackie and the New America Foundation for this opportunity to talk about something that's very important, and that is helping America's families save for the college education of their children. I think it's important to point out at the beginning is that college savings plans started before 529. They were started, as Jackie mentioned, by the states, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, Kentucky. Then we got around to the tax treatment of these plans. But the states were the ones who took the lead in establishing these programs, recognizing the dramatic increase in college costs and the shifting away of federal aid funding from grants to loans. And as a result, the states got involved. We got 529 in 1996. We got and I'll get to that later, other tax provisions that have been important. And so that's how we got to where we are in 1996 and then today. I think they never let me do this. As Scott and Ileana have mentioned, awareness is a major factor about 529 plans, and I think it's largely because we're such a young industry. We really are in the infancy. 401ks have been around, retirement savings, other vehicles. There's just been a lot more out there for the retirement end. College savings is a little younger. We've got an awareness curve with much work to be done. Our marketing budgets by our state plans are very much focused on helping families understand the value of savings And then there's some misperceptions that these are only for the wealthy, and I think Scott has done a very good job of helping us understand that that's not the case. Okay, low and income participation. This is something CSPN has been focusing on for the last number of years. When we put our strategic plan together last year, a year ago, we focused on this, and there are a lot of things that CSPN and the individual states are doing. Just as an example, I've opened Vanguard accounts. I love Vanguard. I'm sorry, it's not an advertisement, but I like low fee index funds, as Ileana has mentioned. It takes $3,000 to start a Vanguard account. It's $25 in the majority of state plans. Our industry providers, the vendors who provide these plans, lose money on those $25 accounts, but that's the value of the state role. The states have insisted that we make these plans available to low and moderate income families, make it easy to get into. It's very important that that continues. Every state offers a low fee direct sold plan. That's a critically important point, in my opinion, to recognize. We make it easy for folks to get in at a low entry point with a low fee, and we'd like to work in the direction of lower fees. That's important. We recognize that. Another state role is marketing and outreach to all of our families. We, in Georgia, for example, we go to all kinds of fairs and festivals and baby fairs, and fortunately, because of my position, I don't have to do that, but it's really important to get out there and spend hours talking to people who would not normally be marketed to. That's what we do. That's what the plans do. It's very critically important that we do that. We spend a lot of marketing dollars to do that. Very focused outreach programs, and very importantly, 24 states have a grant or scholarship program or both. We in Georgia have adopted our top priority for next year is to develop a scholarship program. And so we're going to have to go out and ask for money from foundations, which is probably hopefully their portfolios be back so that they can start giving money for these good things. But that's an important thing. We want to do that. And that's all part of this sending the message that if you're saving, you'll send a powerful message to your children that college is important and that they have a chance to go to college. And Scott referred to that. I'm sorry. They don't even let me run the remote at the house. Tax permanency. One of the most enjoyable things I've got to do in my 12 years as treasurer was to lead the CSPN effort on permanency. It was a lot of fun. We got 74 senators to co-sponsor that legislation, and Susan, who's here, used to say that if we could just get to 100, we might be able to make it work. Well, 74 was actually enough. And we got permanency in the Pension Protection Act, and that was really a critical, important move to remove the uncertainty around the tax treatment of 529 plans, and we saw a large inflow of funds as a result. Our current legislative initiative is H.R. 1351. Now, number one is to extend the Savers Credit for low and moderate income folks, to extend the credit that now applies to retirement savings to college savings plans. As part of our targeting outreach effort in low and moderate income families, we want to make the computer fix kind of an oversight that's been around, and we got the computer fix in the ARRA bill, and we'd like to make that permanent. And then we'd like to make permanent the Treasury's investment direction 2 times a year that was done at the end of last year. We have 43 co-sponsors on that bill in the House. We try to get a few every week. We're pushing along. And as soon as health care is in the rearview mirror, apparently folks in Washington will be able to focus on the other 99 issues that are important out there. So we're working on that. Whenever I talk to one of my colleagues or anyone else, I never miss an opportunity to ask them to get a few co-sponsors on HR 1351. People avoid talking to me for reasons like that. Because I never stop nagging nicely on getting co-sponsors on our legislation. I've got a legacy. We'd like to applaud the work of the Vice President's Middle Class Task Force addressing income barriers to higher education. We applaud the efforts. We're working with the Treasury. We look forward to working with the Treasury. This afternoon, we look forward to working with the Treasury. We agree with many of the recommendations. Some other things we'd like to talk about. But we'll talk. And we think we can, CSPM, we think we can offer some technical assistance. And we're going to continue to make suggestions, work with the Treasury, offer other ways to clarify and simplify some of the tax provisions, and of course we want to prevent abuse, but primarily we want to encourage and support America's families as they save for their children's college education. Thank you very much.
Oops. Sorry, Annie. Oops, no, I'm going. I'm making Dan look good.
It's not easy.
Thanks for having me here today. As Jackie said, the College Savings Initiative is a joint venture between the Center for Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis and New America Foundation. This work would not be possible without the support of our funders, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation for Education. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that the Center for Social Development has done, and then move to talking about our work focusing on state policies that might increase access for low and moderate income families in 529 plans. So first, Scott gave a great overview of savings and why it's important and who's saving. Sometimes we hear, can low-income families save? So there's a literature review available in your packets. Michael Sheridan did this in July, showing evidence that studies in the U.S. and abroad show that although saving is not easy for many low-income families, and they typically save small amounts, that if there's the well-designed structure and incentives, families can do so. So we know that savings matters for financial purposes, but there's also an emerging body of evidence that indicates that savings and household assets, even small amounts, are associated with positive differences in children's lives and can have an impact on educational outlook and experiences. These include higher self-esteem, higher fiscal understanding, and future orientation. Turning to some more recent research, looking at assets and college completion, because that's one of our goals. It's not just getting kids into college, but it's completing college. So typically research has focused on assets, parental income, employment, or parental education in measuring success for post-secondary education. This study used a longitudinal data set looking at assets and college completion. There's a brief in your folder that summarizes this research, and the full research report is available on our website, or I have some copies here if you're interested in the details. But the results indicate, after controlling for family income and a number of other demographic and other kinds of characteristics, the results from the study show that income does not matter, while assets do matter for college completion. And secondly, unsecured debt is associated with a decreased chance in children's college graduation. More financial assets are linked to higher education and expectation of both parents and the children. So again, this paper by Minzon and Michael Shredden is available. And I won't go into more detail at this point. So now transitioning to some of our policy work and research in the states. We'll release very soon a report that we've been focusing on Alaska, and we call their streamlined enrollment and some defaults that are available within that plan. Beginning in 1991, Alaska allowed families via their permanent fund dividend, which is the revenue that Alaska residents get from their oil resources, a checkbox on this application that families could deposit 50% of their dividend into the University of Alaska College Savings Plan. And when this began in 1991, the checkbox was there, but then enrollment materials were mailed to the families. And what happened was the state had a number of families that checked that box, but the materials that were mailed to the families weren't followed up on. So people got the materials, but then they didn't follow through, which is typical in behavioral economics, the inertia, all the materials to go through. So the problem for the state was they had all this money and it wasn't available to be invested in individual accounts. So beginning in 1997, they streamlined this process, this enrollment process, and eliminated the requirement for a separate 529 plan application. So in other words, families that check the box for 50% of that dividend to be placed, even if you don't have an account already, the state will automatically open the account using defaults that they've established. For instance, the person who applies for the dividend is the account owner and beneficiary, but that can be adjusted later. There's implied consent to the terms and conditions of the plan as part of the permanent dividend fund application. There's information sharing of the demographic information and data from state records, and then there's automation and online capabilities. So just to give you an idea, I won't go through all of these steps, but on the left-hand side is a typical multi-step enrollment process for 529 plans. This is for the University of Alaska College Savings Plan and then other plans in general. That you call or write or go online to get an enrollment form. You fill out the multi-page form. You make decisions about investments and who's going to be the account owner and beneficiary, etc. Decide on your contribution method, and then return that either paper form signed to the state or via this online process. So the streamlined process through the PFD, the permanent fund dividend, is to check this box, and then all the work is done behind the scenes, and the account is open and the money deposited. So it served as dual purpose. You're applying for the permanent fund dividend and you're depositing money into a new account. So from the words of my friend and colleague Fred Goldberg, then the plumbing's in place to have this account, which is important. So it's not just about information about saving for college and awareness about 529 plans, but we also need to think and be challenged to make appropriate changes to make sure these accounts are opened. So other things that Alaska is doing is what we call in this paper automatic and default investments. If a state resident enrolls in the plan via the permanent fund dividend application, the automatic investment that's chosen by the state is the ACT portfolio. It's a balanced portfolio that's tied to the tuition rate at the University of Alaska. So if you attend the University of Alaska, the return is guaranteed to keep pace with tuition costs. Other 529 plan enrollees in the state, the people who enroll via that typical enrollment process, are given a number of investment choices, which is normal in 529 plans. In this case, it's about 7 choices, including the age-based funds. But if a family chooses not or does not want to choose an investment option, a default is in place via legislation into the age-based portfolio that's tied to the beneficiary's college enrollment date. Ileana was talking about this just previously. So if families don't want to select an option, the default's there. Again, this we think, looking at 401k plans and ways to streamline participation and understanding and defaults, we're basing this on that research. So in terms of future policy direction, given these examples I gave for Alaska, simplified enrollment and default investments may increase 529 plan access for low and middle income families. You may say, well, not every state has these oil resources or regular dividends, but there might be other ways states can creatively think about flows of funds where people could be presented with the opportunity and the knowledge of the plan, make them aware of the plan, perhaps through the state tax return. Currently, Alaska and Utah offer this in default investments, so this isn't something that's broadly used within 529 plans. And it may be that states are reluctant to offer default due to liability concerns, similar to 401k plan sponsors before the DOL offered final regulations. There were some early guidance, though, for plan sponsors. So, for example, Utah, I said Alaska uses their enrollment-based option or age-based option. Utah uses their plan's FDIC-insured bank product as their default investment. So, again, I'm thinking back to my 401k plan days. Many 401k plan sponsors, before there was guidance, chose the more conservative option, the GIC or principal preservation option. Then the DOL guidance was more the retirement target-based funds. So it would be helpful if there could be federal guidance, and that might encourage more states to create a default. And again, we're just thinking in terms of what would make access available for families who aren't used to investing. So the resources I mentioned, I touched on a number of things fairly quickly. In your folders are the Sheridan summary of the literature about savings by low-income families, the Zahn and Sheridan recent research using the longitudinal data set, and CSD will be releasing probably later this month the paper on Alaska enrollment and default provisions. So thank you for your attention, and I think we're going to open it up for questions now.
If we could just have another hand for our terrific panel this morning, and we're going to have them get in place. Great. Well, this is the opportunity that each of you in the audience has to ask any questions that you have related to what we've heard this morning. So we will open it up. Our colleague Mark Hulsman has the microphone so we can hear your question. We have one right here. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Tim Christensen. I'm a consultant who works on various aspects of college access and success for underserved students. My question this morning is about our emphasis on 529 plans versus alternative savings vehicles. I've been doing a lot of work recently on the potential of individual development accounts, for example, as effective savings vehicles for low-income families. And my question to the panel is, if you would compare and contrast IDAs with 529 plans in terms of which is more suitable and appropriate and approachable, if you will, for low-income families. And furthermore, if IDAs are sort of looking like they are more appropriate, do you think we can tweak 529 plans and their provisions so that they are more appealing and more accessible to low-income families?
I think Margaret Clancy is an expert on this issue, so I'm going to punt it over to her.
Thanks for that question and bringing up individual development accounts, which are, for those who don't know, match savings accounts for low to middle income families, mostly lower income families, for developmental purposes such as education, home ownership, and microenterprise. I did a paper some years ago, it might have been 2003, talking about the possibility to link 529 college savings plans with IDAs. In Pennsylvania and Vermont, there is legislation that you can use your 529 college savings plan as your individual development account saving vehicle. So there's that possibility. Or in Pennsylvania, I think you can roll over your IDA into the 529. So for those states where there isn't a match available statewide, if there are funds via the AFI IDAs or other kinds of IDAs, that would be a way to combine these two vehicles. The other thing is that because post-secondary education is a popular goal for IDAs, there's that synergy. And then finally, the post-secondary education in 529s is for adults and children. A lot of times, as in Scott's presentation, the focus was on saving for children, but adults can also save in 529. So, and a lot of the IDAs are for adults. And if you want to talk separately, we might do so later.
Thanks. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Jim Boyle. I have a group called College Parents of America, and our mission is to empower parents to best support their children on the path to and through college. I have two questions, one for Mr. Ebersol. First, kind of specific to Georgia, and that would be, to what extent has the attention and the publicity given to Hope scholarships had a depressing effect on saving, in that, you know, there's this hope that, well, I'm going to get a scholarship anyway, so why do I need to save for college?
Well, I don't think there's anything depressing about hope. It's a, and I actually worked in the governor's office when that was created. So for folks who don't know, HOPE is the acronym for a lottery-funded program to provide scholarships, free tuition for Georgia students with a B average to attend a Georgia public college free of charge. And that's been very successful. It's a politically popular entitlement program, and I don't think it'll ever go away, although we're running up against some capacity constraints on the funding side for the first time. Chuck Penuel, who runs Path to College, is here, and he can give you some more direct, specific information, but I don't see an impact. First of all, half of freshmen lose their Hope Scholarship when they go. They have a B average in high school, and they don't have a B average in college, and it has something to do with the opposite sex or beer or other distractions that college freshmen encounter, I've been told by my college students, former college students' children. So I think most people know that they better not count on Hope for to be around. Other things, Hope doesn't cover everything. You've got a lot. You've got room and board. You've got transportation. You've got other expenses that are that a 529 savings account will cover. College savings account will cover. So I haven't seen any. I haven't seen an impact. Chuck, do you want to say anything?
No, we try to make it clear in our marketing materials what Hope covers and doesn't cover. It's basically a process of education.
Thanks. Yes, right here, Mark.
Hi, my name is Emily Apple. I'm with Capital Area Asset Builders, an asset building group here in the District of Columbia. My question was for the Department of Treasury representative. Your recommendations seem to be focused not so much on increasing access and use of 529 plans by the lowest income savers. And so two questions. One, I wanted to know, was that a purposeful decision to say that's not going to be our focus? And second, I wanted to know if you considered guidance to states to make the tax benefit for contributions to 529 plans a refundable tax credit as an incentive for lower income families.
That's a great question, and something that we thought a lot about. And I would say, oh, sorry, can you not hear me? So we did, it was something that was not just random. We did think quite a lot about whether it's something that we wanted to push. And first of all, there are states that, for example, offer matching contributions, which in some sense sort of equalizes the tax treatment. And we applaud that. I mean, we think that's really great. We didn't make that a recommendation, in part because of some of the issues I mentioned earlier. It is a slightly riskier investment for low-income families. And we were cautious about trying to say officially, yes, we are going to be pushing low-income families to be making an investment choice that in some cases might not always be the best for them. So that's sort of a limited answer. And then I think a broader answer is that, 529s are great. And this is certainly not any kind of indictment on 529s, but they're part of a larger system. And I think the administration thinks about college going and how to encourage people from all walks of life to think about college and to go to college, as a bigger picture. So, there's a lot of things the administration has done and still wants to do that specifically target low-income families. And maybe it's not through 529. So, for example, there's a lot of things in the Recovery Act that increased financial aid, increased subsidized loans that specifically help low-income families. We have, just over the summer announced a huge community college initiative that just increases the quality of education, accessibility, affordability in community colleges, which I think, again, disproportionately and directly helps low-income families. So we applaud states that are trying to equalize the tax treatment. We didn't go quite so far as making it a recommendation because, at least in our view, perhaps there's a better focus for low-income families on sort of more direct types of aid. Mm-hmm. So, but it was something that, I completely understand where you're coming from, and to the sense that states are trying to equalize the tax treatment, we applaud that.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Sharon Simpson, and I'm representing America's Credit Unions today. And I had a question also on the Treasury Department's recommendations. With almost 60% of parents who are saving for college using traditional bank products like savings, checking, certificates of deposit, why wasn't a government guaranteed option included in your recommendations for states? I think only 4 or 5 have those today.
So, sorry, could you a bit more?
So a lot of parents today are using traditional savings vehicles at banks and credit unions, CDs, savings, and only 4 or 5 states actually offer those as an option in their 529 plan today. Why wasn't that included as a recommendation, expanding those insured government guaranteed options?
I see. That is something that we hadn't really considered. I'm not sure. So Randy, the chief author of the report.
That's not something we explicitly considered. We were aware that, largely in response to the current investment, we were aware that a lot of states have been offering the guaranteed preservation of principal as a result of the recent market downturn. Mm-hmm. And I guess our feeling was that the states have an interest in promoting those products. And we really didn't need to make an explicit recommendation.
But I also think this underscores, our recommendations were the beginning of a conversation, and to the extent that, that this report is sort of a living document, we really appreciate sort of follow-up thoughts, and this might not be the last. Certainly, it's not the last word we have on 529. So I appreciate that.
If I could just make one comment before we go to a question back there. Ohio started offering bank products back in 2005, and that was after 2 years of work to get that product launched. And part of the reason that we did it at the time was that it tracked the data that Scott presented, where he showed the slide where people were saving in bank accounts and CD products because those are products that people understood. Now, some of those people distinguished themselves as savers versus investors, but it was a product that they felt very comfortable with. And, there has been a proliferation in recent months of states now offering these plans because people are demanding them.
And I think that goes in line with just our recommendation of trying to have sort of plain vanilla products for savers. So, your point is well taken.
David?
Hi, David Newville, New America Foundation. I'm just wondering, there's been a lot of discussion about policy options and then additional federal policy recommendations beyond like match savings and so forth. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of the universe of these options to make 529s more inclusive for low-income families. What are some of the things that can be done on the federal policy level to do this?
This is a question to whom?
I guess in general to the entire panel.
Who would like to take that one on?
Well, the first thing I think I would reference HR 1351.
Were you planted?
And would like to ask for your help to get your member of Congress as a co-sponsor. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I'll be back in touch with you. But extending the savers credit, I think, will help low and moderate income folks. The bill as written is a non-refundable tax credit primarily due to the scoring considerations. We'd be glad to make it refundable. So that's.
Can I just ask, Dan, has CSPN done any analysis to determine what they think the impact would be in terms of additional families coming in if that credit were available?
No, we don't have the money to do a study like that, but I'm sure there are people in this room who could help.
Okay. Margaret, did you want to add something to that?
I think I co-authored some policy recommendations on the federal level, so I like David. David led that, so I would like to hear from others on the panel if they have any ideas. Certainly in my presentation, the default investment guidelines would be helpful because Ileana brought up the low costs. If they would be index funds, maybe that would be a way to also promote then the use of index funds for the age-based offering at the federal level.
Why don't we go to Ileana and then let Scott add in on that as well.
Well, I think one thing I think the administration is moving toward is moving away from asset-based tests for sort of moderate to low-income families on financial aid, which I think actually was a real deterrent in investing of any type, whether it's 529s or not. So it is something that we are moving pretty quickly on to eliminate for families below a certain level of income any kind of asset test. So low-income families can now feel I am free to save and invest and be an example to my kids and say I am expecting you to go to college without basically having a dollar-for-dollar penalty when they're 18 years old. So we're thinking about other ways of encouraging investment among low-income families, but I think that was an important step.
Great. Scott?
I mean, I think something that we found, and it's consistent with the research that we had done, is that this idea of getting third parties involved, I think having ways to, awareness is critical to getting families to save for college. And if there are ways, given the fact we found that beyond the tax benefits and beyond all these things that the federal government can do in terms of a direct investment, of opening up 529 plans so that employers, other foundations can be involved in making investments into these 529 plans easier. Employers are incentivized to do that, much like looking at a 401k model where there's no question that retirement savings have ballooned in that space because of the active role that employers have taken. And certainly there's a question of how do you target low income families best, but certainly there's no question for the middle income families who, to your point, have the most to gain out of these savings and the value that they can achieve. Having an employer model and getting those folks involved and making their employees aware of this would be absolutely critical, I think, to really growing the number of families in that segment who are saving for college.
Can I just mention one thing real quick? One thing, too, and I think it came up on one of Ileana's slides, is this issue of financial aid. That is such a critical issue, and I think it's one that the states who sponsor these plans run up against all the time. Even if there isn't an impact on a family's qualification for financial aid because they own a 529 plan, and in most cases there isn't, there is a clear perception by families that if they own a 529 plan, that will count negatively against them when they go to apply for financial aid, particularly state grants and scholarships. So it seems to me if that's something that could be eliminated entirely, not only does it eliminate a potential obstacle, but the real obstacle is the perceived barrier to owning an account and then feeling that it's going to count against them when they go to apply for financial assistance.
And it's tricky. While we can do a lot at the federal level, states have their own rules.
Right.
Private universities have another set of rules. And, you sort of, of course, it's a trade-off. You understand that private universities, to the extent that families are wealthy and have assets, you don't want to be misallocating aid in that sense. On the other hand, the perception that dollar for dollar I save if I'm a low-income family, I think it's very powerful.
It is, absolutely. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Margaret.
Actually, that was the point that I was going to return to, is the financial aid, because the largest piece of financial aid is at the federal level, not at the state. So even though there are 17 states that don't include 529 assets in the calculations, it's really the largest source of aid is coming from the federal government. And it is this similar to the idea of losing benefits if you save. If there would be any misunderstanding that assets would count against for low-income family, because there are already protections for benefits, but it's a complicated formula, and it's difficult to communicate in communication pieces or even one-on-one with families. So I think there's a bill pending right now that if families have $150,000 in income or less, that asset tests would be removed.
I think
so
it's
250.
But yeah,
Okay.
and I
so that I would reinforce the elimination of assets.
And that might take some time to get hold in the sort of among families and the public, but we really do applaud a lot that the Department of Education has done to simplify this, and it is a work in process, but it's something the administration is committed to.
Great, thanks. Sorry, Ready.
My name is Young Kim. I'm from the American Council on Education. Just to talk a little bit more from what this lady said, to what extent does the state have kind of the negotiating power to offer different types of classes of savings vehicles, whether it's the guaranteed option, whether it's an indexed option, in the sense that every state's savings plans are managed by private corporations, TIAA-CREF, Putnam, Merrill Lynch, and they differ in their management styles, where Merrill Lynch tends to be kind of the Nordstrom of shopping versus maybe the Putnam might be kind of the more Walmart version of how money in savings in their funds are managed. To what extent can you actually negotiate the types of investment options that you can actually have at the state level and create those kind of incentives to create fees that are lower across all states?
I'll take that one. The only limitation on the state in terms of what they can offer is what is carved out in their state statute. So there is explicit statutory authority in that state government for the creation of the offering of any 529 plan. So for example, those states that offer prepaid plans generally have language regarding prepaid plans and regarding that state's ability to offer, say, 529 savings plans. With that said, these have developed very differently, and some states have chosen to have an exclusive relationship with one firm or one provider, but most states do have the flexibility to create additional options, but sometimes that will involve hiring another provider in order to offer a different type of product. So for example, when Ohio offered a bank product, obviously we had to go out and we had to elicit RFPs from banks. I think that the states have enormous bargaining power in their contractual relationships with these firms. And over the next several years, you'll see most states' contracts coming up for rebid or renegotiation with those providers. And for many of these plans who this may be the first or the second time they've entered into a contractual arrangement, they typically use the opportunity to renegotiate these contracts to negotiate more money from that provider to do marketing to people in the state, lower fees, and if you notice that over time the fees on these plans have indeed come down. And they've come down because the states have used the leverage they have with the contractual relationships with the investment providers to renegotiate that contract and negotiate something that's more specifically suited to the residents of that state plan. Does that help answer the question? Go ahead.
And from a plan manager perspective, I think it's also, I mean, there's a fine line too that we found. I think there's no question states have enormous power, sort of, calling the shots about what's going to be in these. What options are available, but there's also, to the extent that the people we're trying to reach oftentimes are saving for college and don't view themselves as investors per se, that finding the balance between too many options versus ones that are right size, and I think to the point about having ones that alter over time to save properly given what your risk profile should be at any given moment. If someone comes in the door, and when we're sort of reaching out to folks saying, well, you need to sign up for a college savings plan, and you say, and here are the 30 different investment vehicles that you must choose from, that can create a real strong disincentive for people who might otherwise view themselves as investors from getting into that marketplace, even though there's immense value for them to do so. So I think that states wrestle with this, I know, of finding that sweet spot in the middle where you have lots of options, but not too many options where people sort of throw up their hands and say, well, I don't know what to do here. I think it's a very difficult place to find balance.
Those are excellent points. I'd like to add that size matters, scale matters. As plans get bigger, fees come down. We've done that in Georgia as part of when we brought the assets of Tennessee into the plan. We used that opportunity, renegotiate, to tweak and improve our investment options and reduce fees. So I think some of, on Ileana's slide, some of the variation in fees, I think fees are a factor of the size of the plan. And so as plans grow, fees are coming down. I think that's just a natural evolution in 529.
And I think many states have negotiated in their existing contracts certain price breaks, so as assets in the plan gain a certain level, those fees come down. I did want to ask Ileana one question. It was kind of raised by Margaret's description of Alaska and this idea of the default investment option. I know this is something that we wrestled with in Ohio about whether or not we could indeed offer a default investment option for those people who didn't feel comfortable making their own selection. And we could trace people's application online, and when they would complete the application very quickly, and then they'd get to the point where they needed to elect their investment option, and then they would abandon the transaction. And I think there's a lot of question by a lot of states, and in fact, it sounds like Alaska actually has it codified in state law. And I know in Ohio we had introduced legislation to try to allow us to do that so that we wouldn't run up against any requirements of MSRB and other types of regulatory bodies. So is that something that you've given consideration to, allowing through rulemaking the ability of plans to offer a default investment option?
So I'm definitely not the person. Sort of a lot of legal issues I think involved in terms of liability if that option doesn't work out. So I don't have any real expertise in the legal side of that. Randy, do you have anything to add?
I don't know either. I mean, bounce back the question to you, perhaps no. You're thinking the 401k model where the Department of Labor issued regulations saying as long as you use an age-based, as long as you offer an age-based bond, then you're free of any potential liabilities, right? You're thinking maybe the federal government has
something like that.
The 401ks, of course, were. Well, I'm just not sure. You were suggesting that the states could pass their own laws.
Right.
Would that be sufficient? I think that would be sufficient.
I think in some cases they've done that, and I think there are other states, the state of Maine, for example, which has a charitable foundation set up to establish accounts on behalf of every child born in that state. They're utilizing a default option as well. I'm not sure if they've had it codified in statute, but I think that there is a lot of confusion by states on whether or not they can do that, and that's also a stumbling point for low and moderate income families who, again, may think of themselves as being savers rather than investors. And when they see this wonderful array of choices they have, it's very paralyzing in terms of their ability to make make what they consider to be an adequate decision. So I think that that's something that might be addressed as well.
That's a point well taken. I think it's probably not something that we economists are the best to answer, but it's certainly
the tax policy people.
It certainly might be something that tax policy should look at. And we are having internal conversations at Treasury about this report as well, and that's certainly a great point to bring up, and we'll bring it up.
Okay, great. Jamie, we have our tax counsel, our learned tax counsel in the back, and then we'll get to your question. Maybe you can address that.
Hi, my name is Jamie Knupp. I'm with 529 Council. I've been working in the 529 arena for over a decade, representing a number of states, and been very active in CSPN. My question is for the Treasury representatives and the tax policy folks in particular. And that has to, I applaud the recognition of the importance of a deduction. And if we're trying to avoid bias of any kind, and there are a number of states that don't offer any deduction whatsoever, why not offer a federal deduction? Since the majority of states are conformity states, you would then get a state tax deduction to boot. And if the deduction is such an important factor and recognized in your report, why not offer it at the federal level? And is that one of the policy options you might be offering?
So, Randy, is that?
I don't think we are promoting, I think deductions are great.
Right.
I think if a state wants to encourage participation with a deduction or credit, that's great. We weren't really advocating that more states do so. We were saying if you do so, you should eliminate the bias. So I don't think you read into a recommendation that we were promoting deductions credits, but that's not the case.
There's much more. It's not so much the level of the deduction or the money given back to certain consumers. It's just that every consumer within a state should have an equal incentive to be looking across all states for the point of competition between plans. It's not so much the level of the deduction that we were specifically targeting. So, for example, if a state currently had a deduction for or a tax credit for within state purchases of a 520 or within state investments of a 529 plan, we'd be more than happy if they decided to lower that deduction but now give it to everybody, even if you're investing outside. For us, sort of the economic principle of competition doesn't depend on the level of deduction.
So we could extend that to tax exempt bonds too, and then ask states to
Well, that's certainly not covered in our report, but it's.
You wanted to add something?
Well, Jamie makes a very interesting and I think valid point, which is that if there were just pick a number, a $2,000 U.S. federal tax deduction for contributions to a 529 plan, and because almost all states are in conformity, then you would have a $2,000 tax deduction nationwide, and there wouldn't be any, in y'all's term, home state bias for that. Just an interesting concept. I'm sure that
But is that necessarily true? I mean, they would conform, but they would conform for their own plan, but would they conform to every plan? Is the question.
Well, I think you would get what you want as a result. I think that it would be a very quick second domino to fall, I would expect.
Not necessarily a cheap domino.
Further conversation this afternoon, but this young lady has had her hand up, and then I think we'll probably wrap up the questioning.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I'm here from the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, and I'm currently a college student, so this is a very interesting topic. My question is, in regards to state budgets in the future, cuts that will be seen or are proposed to be seen, how is the 529 plan going to be affected, and therefore, what initiatives are you going to implement for people who do want to save?
Well, these plans really are self-supporting. So the states that operate these plans, there is a fee that is generated that helps support the operation of the plans. Most of the plans are operated on a very, very bare bones type of operation with 2 or 3 people, maybe in the treasurer's office. So cuts in that regard to state budgets should probably not impact that, although there have been some states that have lost staff in their 529 plans. What the more likely bigger impact would be is that, for example, Treasury's recommendation about the state tax advantages is that a state would probably be more likely to eliminate a state tax deduction for all citizens as opposed to increasing it and allowing it for anybody investing in any plan who resides in their state. I think that most state governments are already furloughing employees, and most state employees have taken pay cuts just in order to remain employed. So I mean, that such is the level. You have a treasurer here who's running the budget for a major state in this country, and there are a lot of other economic implications, but that those are the implications I would see.
So I would say that, we are very sensitive to state budgets, and we know next year's probably going to be even worse than this year. So in terms of the state tax advantage, we'd be happy if that were done in a revenue neutral way, where sometimes where for people who are investing within the state, it's lowered a little bit, but it's now spread to people who are investing out of the state. So it can be done in a budget. It can be definitely done in a budget neutral way, and we completely understand that.
Well, just to give you a few numbers from Georgia here, our revenues were negative 10.5% in fiscal 09. First 4 months, we're going to be running at negative 15%. So we're cutting budgets and layoffs, furloughs, but higher education will likely be disproportionately reduced because there's this alternative revenue source called tuition. And so tuition's going to go up, and it just makes college savings even more important, I believe.
In most state governments, the amount of money that the state gives to the state higher institutions, academic institutions, is the largest discretionary part of any state budget. So as Medicaid and other types of expenses, basic human services start to crowd out those budget requirements, that forces states against their basic instincts to reduce the amount of support that they provide to higher ed institutions, which then requires that those schools raise tuition in order to cover costs. So it's a cyclical issue, and I think one of the groups that we're going to pull into the room at a future event will be those colleges and institutions themselves, to get them in the conversation. Scott?
Yeah, I was going to say more fundamentally, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, I mean, the volatility that you see and ability, particularly right now heightened on the state level, to invest in higher education, college savings, improving that rate is key to have a cushion to ride out those volatilities that states feel on a budgetary level. Institutions are pressed right now. I think we've seen that colleges and universities, in order to retain, and retention is absolutely critical to higher education. It's not about just getting them in, it's about keeping them in until they get a degree. As colleges are having to put more and more resources directly, while they have less and less of them, into keeping students in college, having a robust class of students coming in the door with savings at their backs is absolutely critical to making sure that we can keep people coming in throughout, especially when we need people coming into higher education during this economic situation, and we need to keep producing highly qualified graduates. Savings are absolutely essential to doing that, and I think there's not a direct effect necessarily, but it points to the value of savings above and beyond all these other things we talked about.
Thank you all very much. We've kept you a little bit past your time, but please help me thank our panel today and thank all of you for being here.
Always fun to be with you. See you soon. Thanks.
Yeah, see you guys.